I can't do that. Is that the one?
Yes.
That's it.
Again, thank you very much, Joe, for the introduction. My name is Martin Tomitsch. I'm a design researcher and educator at the University of Sydney. At the University of Sydney, we have a number of design programs, including an undergraduate and also a postgraduate program on interaction design. And we are very excited that this year we also started a new major in design, which makes design available to students from other disciplines. So students studying, for example, economics or arts or science can also enroll in our design units. And from 2019, we're also very excited that we will be launching a new Master of Design with two specializations that will be available to choose from, one on design innovation and one on strategic design. Now, we've been teaching interaction design for quite a while at our university, and actually even before it was a thing in the industry. So I think our first students enrolling in our program at the time called Design Computing, it's actually still called Design Computing for legacy reasons, weren't actually quite sure what they would do with that degree when they graduated. I really like this quote by the founder of Design Computing, which explains how this program came to be. So she was saying that initially they thought that technology would change the way we do design. So the idea of this program initially was to bring technology to architecture as a design discipline and to design technology that would change the way architects design. But then they really quickly realized that it was the other way around and that design was actually changing the way we use technology. And that was the birth of our interaction design undergraduate program. Now, I quickly wanted to talk about the evolution of design because I spent some time thinking about this as we were working on our book. It's interesting actually if you look at the evolution of design, we can see that design and the role of design has changed over the years. And so over the past 100 years or so, design has always been used to achieve a strategic advantage in the market. So industries, companies have always turned to design to create better products than the competitors and better products than what is already available in the market. And so initially that involved designers working with engineers to achieve better construction, and then moved on to achieving a strategic advantage by having products with better appearance, better human factors, or usability, better performance. And sort of around the turn of the century, the role of design shifted again, partly driven by technological changes and the advent of the personal computer and digital technologies, where design then was used to come up with better ideas, to achieve better integration, to have a better understanding, and also even to come up with better experiences and to ensure social inclusion. Now, what is interesting is that at this point in time, the role of design is changing yet again. And design is increasingly seen as a capability enhancing skill which can be used to solve intractable human concerns or what is also referred to as wicked problems, and to deal with complex systems. And also, and very importantly, and Gary actually mentioned that also in his presentation, to not just solve problems, but to understand whether we're actually solving the right problem. And so what's interesting is that design is becoming a way of thinking and a framework to solve problems that can't be solved with scientific methods alone. And I'll talk a little bit more about why that is later on. I think this evolution of design is also interesting for us to look at in terms of if for anyone working in design, in the design industry, to look at where we're placed. What is our role as a designer in the industry, or even the company we're working for? What is their role in design, and where they're placed on this scale? And are there maybe opportunities to move across this scale? Now, if you look at the evolution of the industrial revolutions, we can see that we can more or less map the evolution of design also to those four evolutionary periods. Also, of course, the time periods are a little bit shifted here. But again, design always played an important role to help drive those industrial revolutions. And according to the World Economic Forum, we are at the brink of a new industrial revolution, the fourth industrial revolution, which the World Economic Forum refers to as the time or the evolution, the period of cyber-physical systems. So it'll be interesting for us as designers to see what our role will be in driving this revolution and how we can help for this time period and this revolution to become a reality. But again, going back to design as a way of thinking, and looking very quickly, there's just one slide about the history of design, looking at where the history of design and this approach to design is, we can actually see that it's dating back quite a bit. In fact, it's dating back to 1969, which is when Herbert Simon published his book, The Sciences of the Artificial, in which he outlines design as a way of thinking. And this, again, the role of design, it's a way of thinking, or design thinking for short, has evolved over time from focusing on creative action to actually using it as a business strategy development method. And in 1992 already, design was framed or proposed as a way to solve intractable human concerns through the work by Richard Buchanan on wicked problems and the role of design for solving wicked problems. So let's take a look at the value of design. And I don't have to talk to you much about the value of design in terms of developing empathy with our users, which is one of the main values or opportunities of using design in today's industry. And I think Gary really nicely gave an overview of why user research is important, how to do user research right. And also I think he quite nicely outlined why it is so hard, which explains why it's really important to do it the right way and to get it right. But if you look at it more from a business perspective, so the value of design from a business perspective, and that might be interesting even for us as designers if we have to justify the value of design maybe in our work, or argue for the value of design, the value that we can bring to our companies, the companies we're working for, the projects we're working for as designers. So we can see here that, for example, Eric von Hippel, who is a professor at the MIT Business School, found that 70 to 80% of new product development that fails does not for a lack of advanced technology, but because of a failure to understand users and their needs. So again, I think this is a really great justification for why user research is really important and design can play that role. A more recent study conducted by CV Insights showed that the number one reason of startups failing is a lack of a market need. So again, shows very nicely, I think, why it is really important to emphasize and put an emphasis on user research and getting user research done right. So design as a process offers us tools for dealing with complexity. And something that is really interesting on this slide that we as designers maybe don't often realize because we are so familiar to the work we're doing and the way we work as designers, but we don't realize that actually the kind of approach we have to work and the kind of approach we bring to our projects is in many ways responsible for us to be able to, what we describe here, have an attitude of being comfortable with uncertainty long enough so that we can explore the different aspects of a problem area. And that's really important because at the beginning of every design project, there's a lot of chaos, and we don't quite know what the solution is. And that's not a great position to be in. No one likes to be in a situation where we don't know where we're going, and we don't even know whether we are going to be successful, whether we are going to be able to succeed. And that creates stress. And so the number of studies that have found that stress is actually linked to creativity. So being under stress shuts down our ability to think creatively. And that means that we are not less likely to come up with good solutions to the problem we're working on. And so as designers, we're developing this ability to feel comfortable with that situation. We learn to be comfortable with messiness and chaos, uncertainty, and able to still think creatively that way. And that way we're actually able to come up with better ideas and better solutions. And we believe at the University of Sydney that that's also a skill that can be taught to non-designers or people working in other disciplines. So I'll explain this a little bit further through this example, which is a test that is known as the candle test. And so this is a study, or there were a number of studies done in the 60s, again, that looked at the effect on stress and whether we feel comfortable on our problem-solving capabilities. And so what this little test asks participants to do is to use these ingredients, the components you can see on the slide, to attach a candle to a pin wall, and in a way so that you can light the candle without any wax dripping on the floor. Right? And so they put two groups of people in different rooms to do this experiment. And so one group of the participants was put into like a very sterile room. They were sort of just very coldly greeted, put into the room, given the test components, instructions, and then asked to complete the test. And the other group was put into a really relaxed environment. They were greeted really friendly. They were given gifts as they arrived. There was music playing. So they were really feeling comfortable. And they were given the same test. And the study found that those people who were put into a more comfortable environment were actually able to were more likely to come up with a solution to this problem. Now you might be thinking, what is the solution of this problem? To this problem, I will resolve this later. I'll let you think about that for a little bit. So if you look at design as a process, design as a process allows us to start at a design problem, to understand that it's everything we can about the design problem we're working on, and to come up with a solution. Now, usually through that process doesn't necessarily look like this, even though a lot of our students coming into our courses at first might believe that this is the case. It usually looks more like this, and you might all be familiar with this journey as a designer. And so we sort of talk about these different terms in the way we're teaching our courses, where we're looking at the context, we're doing research to come up with ideas and develop those ideas into concepts, which we then test through prototypes, and eventually there might be a product coming out of this. But again, even this is not a linear process, and so we use this model that we refer to as think, make, break, and then repeat. And so we emphasize that through this model and the way we're teaching design as a process, that it is important to go through this model as many times as possible and as quickly as possible as well. And every time we go through this model, we might increase the fidelity of the solution and might also look at particular aspects of the problem or the product that we want to test. So we've published this model in the form of a book, and as Joe was saying, I've got a copy here to give away, so I hope everyone is thinking about very good questions to ask at the end. And what this book is, it's a handbook of 60 design methods. And so each method is described on a double page, where on one side we have a description of the method, along with academic references, and on the other side of the page we have an exercise included that allows to practice that method or to apply that method in practice. And those exercises are based on the way we've been teaching design for over 15 years at our university. So essentially, took all this knowledge from teaching design in different units and put it into a book. And importantly also, we wanted to look beyond UX design or beyond interaction design. And because we really believe that the future of design is more cross-disciplinary than that. It's not just going to be about designing digital solutions, but it's going to be also thinking about the physical aspects of the experiences we create, and it will require people from different backgrounds working together, but also designers having a knowledge of the different areas. So we also involve methods from industrial design and design innovation, so there are even methods in there that let us think or explore the different business models, for example, for a solution, what the solution is built on. Along with the book, we also developed templates that can be used in the exercises, and some of those templates are included in the book, but all of the templates are also available for free under a Creative Commons license on this website, the book's companion website, which is design, think, make, break, repeat.com. So I just thought I'll show you a couple of methods from the book, just a few examples. So as I mentioned, we also deliberately included methods that look at the more business side and the more innovation side of product design and interaction design, which we found especially important because it was an area that maybe we hadn't taught as much to our students, our interaction design students in the past. But it's really important we believe, for our design students, not just to be able to come with great ideas, but to also understand how those ideas could actually be brought to market. And so, for example, one of those methods that was developed by Osterwalder and his colleagues is referred to as the business model canvas, which allows us to explore different business models through a design lens. And so, for example, here we have included a business model canvas template that is based on the original template as well, developed by Osterwalder and his colleagues, and also available from our website. Another method, and another one of my favorite methods, is the method of extreme characters, which is actually based on a research paper. It's published quite a while ago, and it's sort of complementing personas, where we're all familiar with personas, and hopefully we all know that personas are not made up, they're not fictional, they're actually grounded in real data, and it's really important. But extreme characters are made up, so they're actually fictional personas that we're working with. And they're usually representing extreme users. So they might be representing someone like the Godfather, a mafia boss. And so the idea is here that we're thinking, as a designer, we can think through how someone, an extreme user, like a mafia boss, or the Pope, for example, would use the product that we're designing. And by exaggerating those sort of emotional attitudes and the needs of those users, and coming up often with very speculative and maybe crazy ideas, we might be able to come up with more innovative solutions than if we would just be focusing on our actual, real, standard users. And the idea there is to then bring some of that knowledge back into the design process and actually come up with more innovative solutions in the end. Another of my favorite methods that is included in the book is science fiction prototyping. And so similarly to extreme characters, the science fiction prototype is also a little bit more speculative. So the idea is that we think about how our product would be used in the future scenario. And so the method was actually developed by Brian David Johnson, who works as a futurist for Intel. And the reason he came up with this method is that for Intel to bring a new chip to market, it takes over 10 years. So Intel has to, and engineers at Intel have to think now already about how the chips are going to be used in 10 years' time, because that, of course, determines how they're going to design those new chips. And so science fiction prototypes can be represented through short stories or comics or videos, and sort of explore the use of a product or an idea or concept in the future, where often, as any good science fiction story, everything leads to doom and disaster and the world comes nearly to an end. But then again, the idea of taking some of that knowledge that we discovered that way back into the design process and being able to come up with ultimately more innovative solutions. Another activity I like to do with my students, so this slight variation, is especially when I'm teaching design for students who are working on startups, is to ask them to think about how their product that they're working on would improve the life of people in a Walking Dead or a Star Wars world, which again is an extreme environment, right? And it forces them to think outside of the box and outside of the norms that they're familiar with, and hopefully that way come up with more innovative ideas that they can then take back into their actual product. Now we've also started working through this book and other work in the university, looking more at the role of innovation, the role of design for innovation. And actually design has been found to be the link between creativity and innovation. And there are many different definitions for what this means, how design can contribute to innovation, and what different approaches are to using design for innovation. But ultimately it comes down to the idea that design helps to radically redefine what a product means for a customer. So it's not just about coming up with better products in terms of usability or better human factors or better experiences. It's actually about radically defining the meaning of a product. What also all of this work, academic work on design innovation seems to have in common is that they are using similar methods to what we're familiar with from UX design and UX research, but they're talking about customers rather than users. Which is really interesting, and I think we heard Gary also talk about customers and users sometimes, and as we were writing this book, we also had this discussion and we wanted to stick to one of the terms. So we wanted to either just talk about users or just talk about customers. But we very quickly realized that we weren't able to do that, and we had to use both terms depending on the context and depending on the method. And it's actually a really important prompt to realize that our customers are not always the users, right? Or the customers of the product are not always the users. If you think about Facebook, for example, Facebook has customers. They are paying for advertisement, for example, and they're funding the business model of Facebook, but they're not necessarily the users, right? So as a good designer, we have to consider, of course, users and customers. So we wanted to capture all of that knowledge and some of those methods in our book also, and make them really easily available in an open format. And therefore, over the last year, have been working on an online course, which will be hosted on Coursera, and it's going live this Monday. And so we are calling it Innovation for Design: Think, Make, Break, Repeat. And we didn't only wanted to talk about the academic side of design and how we're teaching design and design methods that we're using to teach design, but we wanted to also give learners an opportunity to hear from practicing designers. And so we chose 3 quite different companies that are all doing quite unique design work in Australia, and captured interviews with designers from those companies, which are included in this open online course. And I'll just play a very short trailer that will show some of that footage.
The ability to test and experiment in design is everything.
There's always going to be problems to solve.
Creativity is still going to be at the heart of a design process.
I wish I'd known that you couldn't do it all yourself.
You never know what you could bring to the table that other people aren't thinking of.
And never be afraid of the thing that you don't know.
Be entirely okay with failure. You're gonna fall flat on your face. Me, I shipped Windows 8. That was a huge failure. I've learned from that and I've grown.
I think innovation is in our DNA as designers.
You never know when you might have a spark of an idea.
It doesn't just happen overnight. It's about throwing a whole bunch of stuff out there.
Because ultimately you're trying to bring about a better product to improve on users' life.
We start off with research, going out to companies and understanding how they work.
Just as important as having a good idea to research is actually knowing the psychology of how to research as well.
Data is truth, essentially, if it's well analysed.
Being able to design a solution that balances between solving a problem for the customer and delivering real business results.
We design things for a reason. We make decisions while we're designing for a reason. So you've got to be able to articulate that back succinctly.
It's about prioritization. Knowing what to work on is quite a art, but also focusing on the right things to work on. That is quite essential if you want to succeed.
Creating something that is effective in bringing value, whether it's one person or a society, that's kind of how I see design innovation.
We will definitely be at the forefront of some of the solutions that will enable people to have better lives.
All right, if you go to Coursera.com now and you search for Design, Think, Make, Break, Repeat, you'll be able to enroll already in our course, and on Monday you'll be able to see all these amazing videos. And you can watch them in your own time. So the last thing that is left to do is to resolve the puzzle. I hope you've all been thinking very hard while I was talking about how to solve this test, and hopefully the pizza and the beer and the talks will have you put in a comfortable enough environment to be able to think creatively and solve this complex problem, and here's the solution. Thank you very much.